r/ask Reddit. Teachers of Reddit, what's the worst fight you had to break up? I witnessed a similar incident in our high school. At the time, it wasn't very diverse and had a lot of good old boys. Well, one of our African American students, Joe, upset one of these guys during lunch. We will call our country kid Billy. Billy pushed Joe in the chest, and Joe just stood there. They both stared each other down, and I think it suddenly registered on Billy that Joe was the state wrestling champion. So, now he was stuck. He was going to have to back down and basically worm his way out of a fight he started, or fully engage and get his ass kicked. In the oddest thing I ever saw, Billy came up with an alternative plan. He beat up his own leather jacket. He turned away from Joe, picked up his jacket and just started whopping it against the table over and over again, yelling "Come on!" over and over again. And he did this with all of the seriousness and anger he had summoned for Joe. Everything just kind of fizzled, and Billy, sweating and heaving, sat down after letting his jacket have it. I taught adults at a vocational school, mostly from rough neighborhoods. We had been warned to never try to break up a fight, as many of these students carried knives and so forth. Some woman had a bad falling out with her group of friends, and was sitting separated from them. They were talking back and forth, very loudly, very aggressively across the room. I couldn't control them, and went to get a supervisor. With me and the supervisor guy there, one of the girls from the group came across the room at the odd one out. She is big, 6 feet and 250 pounds, and charges across the room at the odd one out, who is maybe 5'2 inches. Supervisor gets in between them. They fight around him for a second, then smaller woman slashes the face of bigger woman with a razor or something. That pretty much ended it, other than a few thrown things and tussle, but a lot of hair and braids were ripped out and there was blood everywhere. Supervisor was lucky. They literally fought around him, and the smaller one whipped that blade over his right shoulder to slash the other one's face. This was on a Tuesday, and they were to effectively graduate on Thursday. Insane. I'm an English teacher in France. This happened in the classroom next door to mine, and I just witnessed the aftermath and heard the gossip from my friend, who did break it up, and was there to hear the story when they got hauled into the admin's office. One of my male students was named Timothy, who was dating a girl named Anna a year under him. One day last year he apparently left his phone unattended and unlocked, and she picked it up and started searching through it. What Anna found was his very male best friend Louis sexting and sending him nudes and talking about how much he loved him, and Tim was texting back and being equally enthusiastic about the two of them being together out in the open once they finished school and were in university. She proceeded to screenshot and send all those texts, sexts and nudes to her boyfriend's parents before replacing his phone so he wouldn't know. Tim's parents are very conservative, and when I say very, I mean very. His mother once called me to complain about his grade in English, and it evolved into a rant about foreign students. That would make Marine Le Pen proud, and Anna knew, so that's why she went this revenge route. This kid went home to be blindsided thanks to her, and apparently he had to basically flee the house because he was afraid of his father literally killing him. Louis turned up to school the next day, calmly entered Anna's first period class, and beat the ever-loving shit out of her. Just wailed on her. He was skinny thing, but knew what he was doing, and she was super tiny, and it was not a fair fight at all, and he just obliterated her. I just heard him screaming after he had been restrained, which is when I went to go check. She had a black eye and a broken eye socket, and there was blood everywhere from her mouth and nose. Louis was borderline hysterical and screaming about her being a bitch who ruined Tim's life. It was bad. I'm not a teacher, but I have worked in K-12 ed for 10 years, so I have been in a lot of classrooms. Teachers aren't supposed to break up fights, and usually get hurt trying to do so. That being said, the worst fight I saw was in a science lab. I was in the back of the lab installing some software to go with a digital microscope, and a large 8th grade girl was singing disrespectfully while the teacher was talking. Tiny 8th grade girl behind her was getting pissed and telling her to shut up, because she couldn't hear what the teacher was saying. Big girl continued to sing. Tiny girl says for the last time, "Shut the fuck up, I'm trying to learn." Then proceeds to leap over the lap table between them, grabs the big girl's hair, and proceeds to bash her face into the table over and over again, screaming at her to shut the fuck up. They had to get a very large male administrator in there to pull her off. The teacher got elbowed in the face when she tried to step in, said screw it, and ran out into the hall to get an admin. Fun times. I had a student who fought a few times in my class and was one of those blind rage type fighters who would just swing at anyone until he got back under control. He was manageable in my class, but he was sent to homeschooling after a fight he got into in the hallways. Something stupid set him off, and he punched the other kid a few times before being restrained by one of the security guards, who he also punched in the face. During the same fight, a teacher was trying to separate the two students, and he accidentally, but still, broke two of her fingers. It dawned on me that day why they tell us to not get between students fighting. She was lucky that 1, she wasn't hurt worse, and 2, that she wasn't written up on disciplinary charges for breaking that rule. Edit. Since this got a lot of attention, I'll clarify a few things. This is in an urban district on the East Coast US, and security guards are the norm, 2 to 3 per floor plus a roaming resource officer who is a full-fledged police officer. Cameras in every hallway and the lunchroom. The district is a former Abbott district and something like 85% of the students come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. A lot of the students have shitty or non-involved parents, so there's a ton of disciplinary challenges on top of teaching students who are mostly below level in basic things like reading and writing. Fights are commonplace, but this one was especially brutal. Actual teacher here. It was after school, and I was headed to the copy room. On the way is the cafeteria, which had been cleared of all the tables, and was basically just one big empty area, except for the huge mass of students that had developed. I rushed into the massive crowd, where two different circles had formed. It was literally like being at a metal concert with two mosh pits. At least 16 kids were fighting. When I broke through, one kid fell in front of me, and the guy who pushed him ran up and did a Janikowski kick to his head. All metal moshing instincts kicked in, where my main goal was to basically push away as many people as possible and keep them away from each other until more apps/officers could arrive to help. It was chaos, so I don't remember much after that. To this day I don't even know why they were fighting. Once everything was settled, I picked my paper back up and went back to making copies. I taught for 2 years in a very rough boys school where I had to break up fights almost daily. I'll share 3 stories. The first fight was when 2 students started fighting because of, well, I can't quite remember, to be honest. It probably started as an argument over which one's mother is a bigger whore, or maybe who owed who drug money. The fighters were grade 9 aged. It took 4 staff members to break the 2 apart, and even more to keep them separated after the initial blows. At the height of the chaos, both were throwing chairs, tables, and whatever else they could get their hands on. The end result was damaged windows, broken doors, and quite a few staff members that had cuts/scrapes/bruises from trying to keep the 2 away from each other. I'm pretty sure they met up outside school to settle their differences later that week. The second story is a bit more lighthearted. In my first few months of teaching at the school, I rewarded a group for good behavior by taking them to play soccer on their small hard court area. When I say good behavior, I mean they hadn't assaulted or verbally abused each other in my class all week. Even though I was still new, I felt like I could trust them since they had been relatively well behaved and they were a small group. In the middle of the game, which was going great by the way, 2 players from opposite teams had a moment of frustration and started swinging haymakers. They both got a few good shots in, and by the time I was able to get in between them, the fight was over. We took a 5-minute break, they shook hands, and we continued the game. I didn't write them up for that one. The last story is one of the few times where I legitimately thought I would have to defend myself. I was on duty at the hard court during break, and I challenged a student on his behavior. He had been picking on a younger student, and all I had asked for him to do was stop. When he kept doing it, I approached and told him that he had to leave the hardcourt area. Once I was within 5 meters or so, he turned on me. He started telling me to fuck off and cursing at me with every word in his vocabulary. Everything seemed to slow down at this point as he started to walk towards me with what I could feel was an intent to hurt. At the same time though, I could sense the other students watching and starting to move closer towards us. I began stepping back while talking to him, trying to de-escalate the situation, and I even outstretched my arm towards him to try to keep space between us. Before the student was able to fully reach me, he was turned and escorted away by 3 other students. As shitty of a situation as that was, to me that incident had a silver lining. Even though at times I'm sure they all had their differences with me, that day I felt lucky to have those boys as my students. I'm not sure what would have happened if they hadn't stepped in, but I do know it would not have been a positive outcome. I'm a school bus driver. My first year driving I got the bad school. Kids living in houses with boarded up windows kind of neighbor I pikes up in. But I was the only ride these kids had, and I loved them. A few small fights in the afternoon but nothing really bad all year till mid-June. I pull up to my first stop, and there's Tommy on top of his sister Jane. Tommy was in grade 1, Jane in grade 2. Their older brother Billy was yelling at them. I saw this from afar. I sped up, slammed on the brakes, AMD flew out of my bus without thinking. Ripped Tommy off of Jane. He still had the wire in his hand. He was trying to kill her. Now, being in the neighborhood I was in, I couldn't send him home. So I threw him on the bus, not really, and made him sit up front with all other kids at least 3 rows away. Took him into the school. I held his hand and his sister's, and we walked into the principal's office. The principal seemed like he didn't care, and I didn't see Tommy the rest of the year. No one told me what happened. That was over 5 years ago. We lost the run to another company, so I don't know how he's doing. Just a quick note, Jane could breathe. No marks on her neck, and she was okay physically. Clear airway and all. Older brother Billy said it happened as I turned around the corner. I still think, if I had a cell/radio I would have called 911. Not a teacher, but saw the craziest fight when I was in high school. There was a girl, I'll call her Girl A, who was mentally challenged. Rumors were she was a preemie born addicted to drugs, shitty home life, in foster care, just all around crappy situation for her. She was about 4 minutes and 10 seconds in high school. Just a really little person. Well, this one girl, Girl B, thought she was the prime target to bully. And, well, she picked the fucking wrong person to bully. B messes with A for a few weeks until the day A snaps. Here's the thing, in our high school we had the gates that dropped down to close off corridors. You just hit the emergency release, and the gates slam down and there's no leaving that corridor until the on-campus police officer comes to unlock it with a key. Never had these gates been used until B messed with A for the last time. Remember, A is mentally challenged and special needs. B is messing with A and all of a sudden A runs for the emergency release button for these gates to drop. Gates drop, it's A and B and a few bystanders stuck in the corridor. A beats the ever-loving shit out of B. Remember how the on-campus police officer has to unlock the gate with a key? Yeah, well that took a solid 5 to 6 minutes to go get the key and get back to the corridor. And by this time there's students on each end of the corridor pressed against the gates to watch the ass kicking that's happening. B ended up going to the hospital and never came back to school. Rumor was she was an alternative school for all the bullying and they ended up in a state psych ward. I had to tackle a 6th grade boy that had a 5th grade girl by her hair on her knees, pounding her face in with brass knuckles. He broke her face in several places and knocked out most of her front teeth because he had asked her out and she said she was too young to date. The kid fought me like crazy while I had him pinned, kicking, pushing us across the grass so that my face is digging a trough into the field, trying to bite me, spitting on me, all while I'm thinking, I just bum rushed and tackled a student. I'm going to get fired. I laid on top of him until the cops got there. They investigated what happened, and I wasn't in any trouble because the general consensus was that he could have killed her, and I went with the least violent way to subdue him, and I didn't injure him. The 5th grade girl spent some time in the hospital and had to have some mild facial reconstruction surgery. The boy went to juvenile hall. My stepdad was a teacher back in the late 70s and early 80s. He got stabbed by a middle school student during their fight over a girl. So he had a reputation among the students as the hardest former military teacher. A reputation that he passively encouraged and got a kick out of. The students knew that he was former military but didn't know what exactly he had done or if he had ever seen any action. Most assumed that he had. So he walks into the library purely by chance. He was just there to copy some paperwork and finds a fight in progress. Apparently a girl had been cheating on 2 different guys and they had just found out about it at the same time. As is tradition, they tackled each other and started throwing hands. So he walks in right as one of them is getting up from rolling around on the ground and he starts heading that direction. On his way across the library, he sees a flash of metal. The kid just drew a knife. And he's turning towards the girl, who has been standing there watching the fight. My stepdad gets there right as the kid is lunging towards her. So he pushes her out of the way and takes the knife in the meaty part of his shoulder. Then the kid lets go of the knife in holy shit I just stabbed the army teacher shock. All the color drains out of his face as he realizes what just happened. And he turns to run. My stepdad growl yells, "Don't make me chase you, or so help me, I'll pull this knife out and use it." The kid freezes in his tracks, apparently believing that my stepdad is serious. So he grabs the student by his jacket and marches him into the office. The secretary doesn't even look up from her typewriter when they walk in. He says he needs to talk to the principal. She says he's busy in a meeting. He says whatever the principal is doing can wait. This is when she looks up, sees the knife sticking out of his shoulder, sees the blood soaking through his plain white dress shirt, and sees the very sheepish looking student being held by his jacket collar. As she's processing all of this and trying to find words to respond, he walks right past her and into the principal's office. The principal was apparently on the phone, discussing his most recent golf game. Super busy, eh? So they eventually get police and an ambulance to the school. The kid gets carted off to juvie, and the ambulance drivers are shocked to find that the knife is still in his shoulder. He still hadn't pulled it out. He apparently told them something along the lines of "I've seen enough movies to know that if I pull it out and get a spray of blood, I'm fucked. I'll let you guys uncork that bottle." So naturally, they plucked it out and slapped a butterfly bandage over it. They put his arm in a sling and told him to avoid moving around too much. He already had the rest of the day off. So he went home and slept the day away while high off his ass on painkillers. The next morning though, he walked in the front door with his arm in a sling. A girl saw him, went white, then screamed and ran down the hallway. Apparently the rumors flying around the school were that he had flown into a blind rage after being stabbed. Apparently he ripped the knife out and had gone postal on a group of innocent nearby students before succumbing to his wounds and dying. The school actually had to have a special announcement to try and quash the rumors. My first year teaching, I had to break up a bunch of typical middle school fights: hair pulling, fighting over boys, weak punches when boys were involved. 7th grade. We had a bit of a gang problem, so it was fairly common. 2 still really stand out to me though. The first involved 2 girls fighting over a boy who had been sent to juvie. I walked out of a classroom where I was observing, and one was already being held back by our 7-foot-tall social studies teacher. The other girl was ripping fistfuls of the other girl's hair out and screaming, "Bitch, he's my man. Get the fuck out to my hall." Other girl who had her hair ripped out was an 8th grader, and 8th graders were supposed to stay out of the 7th grade hall. The screaming one was a student of mine, so I just walked in, asked her calmly to let go or be picked up, and picked her up to take her to the office while she screamed and clawed at me. At one point, she promised to calm down, and I fell for it. She immediately ran back and began fighting again, so I had to carry her to the office. Later, they asked if I wanted to press charges for the kicking and scratching. I literally laughed in the deputy's face. How vindictive are people that they have to ask if you want to ruin a 12-year-old's life? There was one even worse than that, though. I had one student who was a gang leader in my class, but he was always respectful with me and worked hard in class, so I just sort of chalked it up to rumors. One day near the end of the year, I turned around to write something on the board and heard a girl scream. I turned around, and the quiet respectful kid had ripped one of my loudmouths out of his seat and was kicking him with precision directly in the kidneys while bellowing, "Think you gonna jump one of my boys? Fuck you, bitch." I was horrified. This kid was a weightlifter, and prying him off of the other kid who was curled up in the fetal position was nearly impossible. Once I did get him off, I screamed at the other kid to get the next door teacher. Being the antagonizing ass that he was, he stood there and called the kid from the gang a pussy. The kid from the gang escaped and chased the other kid around the school, throwing furniture at the instigator and screaming. It took me 5 minutes of chasing them through the halls, while the other teacher watched my classroom to get admin or the deputy to help. It was then that I decided not to teach middle school anymore. I teach high school now and see my old 7th graders a lot, including fighters. One even apologized to me. Most of them want me to teach them when they reach the grade I teach. I just really hope they have chilled out with time. Young, female high school teacher here. Worst fight I've broken up. A 250-pound kid pushed a 90-pound girl from behind, sending her skidding about 8 feet down the hallway on her stomach. She jumped up and shoulder checked him into the lockers and just started beating the shit out of this guy, punch after punch right into his face. I walked up behind her, grabbed her around the waist, and lifted her off of him as she continued to punch him. As I walked them to the office, she looked at me and said, "I don't even fucking know who this guy is." Worst fight I refused to step in and break up. The two largest toughest guys in our school got into it in the hallway right in front of my classroom. These were the kind of boys that were already pretty much grown men and each had around 100 pounds of muscle on me. I heard yelling in the hallway and turned around just in time to witness one punch the other square in the teeth. He hit him so hard that I swear I could feel the vibrations in the air. Like, I felt the punch, it was so hard. And oh my god, the sound of it. They then started punching at each other as they rolled around the ground in a huge pile of blood that had come from the one's mouth after the first punch. I would have gotten hurt breaking it up. I internally said fuck that and called the office to tell them to send out police resource officer and admins down there as soon as possible to break up the fight of the decade. OMG, I can answer this one. My first year teaching, I was stuck in BFE, farthest away from the security office, near a door that lead to a side street, so when fights did happen, the culprits could just run away without repercussions. Suffice to say, I saw some shit. So, fist fight starts right outside my room. As a female teacher without restraint training, I didn't try to break it up but rather tried to keep a perimeter for the ever-tightening circle of spectators. At some point, one boy slams the other's head on the corner of metal railing. The kid's forehead just splits and now blood is everywhere. Bloody McBloodface then gets shoved into me, and I'm now covered in blood. Kids are going wild. They're loving it. At this point, security arrives. Security on our district, a large public urban school, were legit, armed, uniformed city police officers. Their SOP for stopping a fight isn't to touch anybody, it is to just mace the shit out of everyone until it breaks out. So, the two kids get maced, including Bloody McBloodface, who is now on the ground getting kicked. The crowd gets maced. I get maced directly in the face. The crowd disperses. Combatants get taken away in handcuffs. One of the students in my class begins to have an asthma attack because dumbass. So I was covered in blood, neck, chest, arms, sobbing and gagging and coughing due to the mace, with a kid having an asthma attack. And none of my fellow teachers would cover my class, so I could take my asthmatic kid to the nurse. Also, did I mention I was covered in fucking blood, including a fair amount on my bare skin, and had to take care of that? I was so pissed. Walked the kid to the nurse, stripped down to my tank top, and threw away my shirt and cardigan. Had to fill out a bunch of OSHA paperwork due to potentially being exposed to bloodborne pathogens. Went back to my classroom, told the students not to talk to me for the rest of the day, and started looking for teaching jobs elsewhere, because fuck colleagues who won't cover for you when you're covered in mace and someone else's blood, and have a student having an asthma attack. Fuck you, Trussie. It was your fucking prep period and you couldn't help me out, you miserable old cunt. Used to teach at a rough school. I was on my only prep period for the week, and I was Skype interviewing for a new job. The school was closing due to consolidation. I heard a commotion in the hallway, and I told the interviewers to wait a minute. I was expecting some kid to be running or something. Nope. 2 middle schoolers with the crowd not around, but on both sides, because it's a hallway. A teacher was yelling, ineffectively, at the 2 students, one who had a switchblade out, and another who was talking shit. I swam through kids, until I was behind the kid talking shit, and I was telling the crowd to get away. They got away, and then I was trying to calm down both of the kids, basically talking calmly about calming down and stuff. Got in between the kid, who was talking shit, and the kid with the knife, and the kid with the knife said fuck you to Mr. McMendez, and lunged at me. He missed. I grabbed his arm and kidney punched him. Kid went down and dropped the knife. I got the knife and held the kid down until a few more teachers, the resource officer, and the principal came. Both the kids went with the principal and the cops came after. Principal got a rundown from me, and I went back into my room. I then went back into the interview and said I had to stop a fight. Few minutes later the cops came to ask questions and the interviewers heard the account and I could hear the holy shit from the screen. Me and the kids went over social and emotional stuff the next day and how to help each other emotionally and handle situations. Don't know if that was a requirement, but I wanted to go over that. I've boxed and wrestled for over a decade, so if some other teacher had tried to intervene I have no idea how that would have worked out. I used to substitute teach in a large inner city district in the Midwest. I would see fights a couple times a week, usually pretty minor stuff. Someone talked trash, the other person didn't like it, and took a swing. A few punches get thrown, security shows up, and takes the students to the office. Drama over. Now, as a substitute teacher who is not covered by the union, and doesn't get paid nearly enough money to risk life and limb breaking up fights between significantly bigger students that won't be talked down, we were specifically told that we would be fired if we physically intervened to break up a fight. So at one particularly rough high school, a couple of students that are both about 6 feet 5 inches and around 250 to 300 pounds start getting into it in the hallway during class. And I did what I was supposed to do, called the office by cell phone. My underfunded school didn't even have landlines. Alerted them of a fight and went into the hallway to try and talk them down. Student 1 says F, U, N-word, and the other one says what, N-word, you want some of this too? That student walks towards me, I walk away. Then the other student sucker punches the second student right in the face and the fight ensues. Security shows up a couple minutes later and breaks it up. Both students are bruised, but no serious injuries occurred. I give my report to administration and get back to teaching. 1 hour later, I got called to the principal's office, who immediately starts yelling at me for not breaking up the fight. I said, you know I'm a substitute teacher, right? Because it has been well established that subs who break up fights through physical means will get fired. The principal said, I don't care. You should have broken up that fight. After today, you will no longer be allowed to teach at this school. In this district, a school can ban a substitute teacher for any number of often arbitrary reasons and substitutes have no recourse for appeal. So I went back to the rest of my day, taught my classes as I normally would, and saw the principal on the way out.